At this point, you might realize that you've been defining a particular function every time you wanted to animate your program, the draw function. To remind you, here's our animated car program. So remember, we have this var x equals 11, which is the initial position of the car, and var draw surrounds all of our drawing code, and then we change x by 3 each time, and then we can just restart and go, woo, zoomy, zoomy, zoomy. Now that you've learned how to make your own functions, you might be wondering, what about this draw function? Is it a custom function? Why is it always named draw? Well, those are very good questions. You see, in our environment here on Khan Academy, there are a few special global functions, which I call magic functions, but that's just my own name for them. Basically, when we run your program, we look to see if you defined functions with certain names, like draw, and if you have, then we call them at particular times. So, for example, when you define the draw function in your code, then we'll find that function and we'll look at the code inside of it and we'll call that code over and over and over as fast as we can. If you don't define a draw function, then we won't call anything because there's nothing there. So that means if we rename this function to draw, okay, that didn't work, or to draw car, okay, that didn't work. So if we rename the function, the program no longer finds it because it's not called draw anymore, so it doesn't run that code over and over. So we end up with nothing. So this means that you shouldn't name your own custom functions draw unless you want them to be treated specially and called over and over. Now, draw is not the only magic function available. There's also a bunch of functions for reacting to mouse interactions and key presses. Let's show an example of another animation program. So let's see if we wanted to draw a colored ball whenever the user is moving their mouse, right? So we have draw and then fill and then ellipse at mouse X, mouse Y, 10, 10. Okay, let's try this. Okay, cool. We have this really cool colored ball thing going on. So this function, this code inside this draw function, we'll call it called over and over because we've put it inside a function named draw. So it'll get called even if the user isn't moving their mouse, right? Like it's getting called right now, even though my mouse is not moving. So as it turns out, there's a better way to do this that's more efficient. What we can do is change this draw function to mouse moved. So our environment always checks programs to see if they've defined a mouse moved function. And if so, they'll call it whenever the user moves a mouse. So you can see once again, it still works. But they won't call this if they're not moving the mouse. So as soon as I stop moving my mouse, it's not called anymore. So remember before when we had draw, that code was getting called over and over and over even when the mouse wasn't changing. But now that we're using mouse moved, we're only calling the code when we need to, when the mouse actually changes. So our program is much more efficient. Generally, if you only want to change your program output when the user moves the mouse, then it's better to have it inside that mouse moved function instead of inside draw. Okay, there are a bunch more magic functions like mouse moved. So there's mouse pressed and mouse released and key pressed, and you can read all about it in the documentation. But the key thing to remember is this. If you want to use the magic function, spell it correctly. If you don't, make sure you give your own custom functions a new name.